So this is actually our 15th Barichara update. So we've now been going for what's close to 4 months because we had a couple of weeks that we weren't able to do the Thursday calls for one reason or another. So we've actually been doing these weekly now for nearly 4 months. And the original purpose of the Barichara updates was to let people know how the Barichara ecoversity is taking form and to share the way that we're engaging in regenerative practices here on the ground and really start to create these multi-directional learnings between people and other places. And I think at this point, there's a lot of sophistication to the dialogues that we've had. We have recordings of the previous 14 Barichara updates. And this one in particular is going to focus on how we are designing the event for the ReFi Barichara experience that starts next Monday. And several of you on the call are about to jump onto buses or airplanes and taxis or on your bicycles. Well, maybe not, but I do know people who have biked through Sagamosa Canyon, and it is physically possible, but you need to be in pretty good shape. For those of you who don't know where you're going yet, you're going to enter an incredibly rugged and beautiful landscape in the northern Andes in Colombia. And what I want to talk about today is really this interesting question of how do we cultivate bioregional governance and sovereignty? And I think that is a huge topic that we'll probably be exploring for the next 20 years. So I don't expect us to get farther than just creating a concrete experience that we can reflect upon, while also sharing some of the details of what's going to happen at ReFi Barichara next week. Since some of you are coming to ReFi Barichara, you'll probably have questions about the agenda itself and how it's being structured. But I think more interestingly for me is how we formed two teams that represent two different loci of power, two kind of realms of decision-making, and now we started to work on blending them to share the power of decision-making. And so that's what I'm going to cover today in a brief presentation where I've prepared some slides just so that we'd have like visual concepts to think from. And then from those visual concepts to think from, we'll have a shared context for a conversation. So what I'd like to do is spend the next maybe 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, sharing some slides and explaining a bit of what has been happening in the last week. And then from there, we'll go back into group discussion and exchanges. And so let me go ahead and start the presentation portion, which is right here. The main thing I want to emphasize is that everything that's going to happen at ReFi Barichara is possible because of 3 women you see in this scene, and then additional people. And this is Natalia Ortiz, who's there front and center. Her hand is sort of covering the face of Yvonne, who is behind her, Yvonne Valencia. And then off to the right of the image in the white and striped shirt is Margarita Higuera. And they are part of a team that is holding the community side of the ReFi Barichara event to really help create as much clarity and separation, as well as synthesis and integration between the people who live in Barichara, who do regenerative work, and the people from all over the world who are coming to the ReFi Barichara event. And what I want to describe today is more like the design thinking and some of the practices that we're using to make this happen. And I want to begin with this simple illustration that I made today, which is that there's this flow of people coming in from the outside. They are landing into the ReFi Barichara space, which is a 5-day event, although some people are coming before, some people are staying after, some people are going to stay for months after as digital nomads. And so there's this blended space of people coming into ReFi Barichara that overlaps with a lot of locals in Colombia. And here by locals in Colombia, I really mean people who live and work in the Santander region, or the Santander Departamento, as they would call it in Colombia, in the area around Barichara doing regenerative work. And the idea is that the local people are already rooted in place. The people from the outside are not rooted in place, and they're not likely to be. It's not like people coming to this 5-day event are going to stay here and lay down roots. I mean, that might happen, but that's not like the intention for all of them. Most of them, that won't happen. And so the question becomes, how can we create a strong and healthy bi-directional relationship between the rooting in place and the local people and the people from the outside, and then the people from the outside who come here for this experience and then interact with other people from the outside who didn't have this experience. So we have these different ways of relating to this question. How do people arrive into a bioregional regenerative project and try to create authentic connections? And then from those authentic connections, do something that is beneficial to everyone, so that it's not extractive, so that it's not colonialism, so that it's not that sort of token, we had the photo shoot with the locals, but really the locals have no say in what happens. And so there are all these linkages between the different kinds of people just in this simple diagram. There's an implication of many different power dynamics and relationships. And usually, I would argue, this relationship is done badly. Usually there are accidental hierarchies or imbalances of power. Usually there are accidental or intentional extractive practices. And we're trying to counter that and go in the opposite direction. We're trying to create healthy, diversified, and balanced sharing of power while maintaining local autonomy and local sovereignty. And while we're trying to do that, we're surely going to mess up. We're surely not going to get it perfect, but we're going to learn a lot. And even as we learn to do it and stumble, we're going to do the best we can. And so it's with that in mind that we created a structure for the ReFi Barichara event that looks like this. I just wanted to create something like a cartoon, just a really simple way of explaining something that's actually got a lot of delicate and complex design built into it. And that is that, as you can see, the blue, which is the emergent design sessions, which are going to be facilitated by me and a team of people around me who are mostly not people from Barichara. I live in Barichara and I've been here for 3 years, but I'm not from Barichara. So these emergent design sessions are for the participants of the event. We do have some people who are coming from the community to participate in them, those who are bilingual, because all of this will be in English. And the language barrier is a huge challenge for creating a deep relationship with the local community. And so these emergent design sessions are going to be focusing on how do we regenerate an entire territory. And then everything else that's designed in the immersive experiences and the invitation for local presenters is in service to how do we learn how to regenerate an entire territory. And so the way that the experience is going to work is that on the opening day on October 3rd, if you want to think of it as the bottom of this graphic is the morning and the top of the graphic is the afternoon. So you go through the day from morning to night by going from the bottom to the top. What this means is you can interpret October 3rd as we're meeting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for our opening ceremony. At 2 o'clock, people can arrive to register. At 3 o'clock, we start, and we're going to have an emergent design session where we're going to introduce the context of the territory, talk about its history, show a map of the projects, and show people, like contextualize people into how they arrive into the territory, to have a sense of perspective on what this territory is, what its history is, how it came to be degraded and destroyed, like monoculture agriculture and deforestation and things like this, a history of violence, how peace was constructed, how people came to set up regenerative projects, how we began to integrate those regenerative projects across the territory. We'll be setting that context in the opening. And then on October 4th, 5th, and 6th, we're going to have full day agendas where in the morning we divide the participants into 3 groups, and each group will go and visit each of 3 different experiences. So they'll visit one each day for a sequence of 3 days. And the immersive experiences are bringing the outsiders to the locals. The purpose of the immersive experiences is to connect the participants of the event, who are mostly outsiders, to connect them with on-the-ground regenerative projects, community projects that are helping to integrate supply chains, to connect cultural trauma healing together with economic development, to connect education of children with landscape restoration. And the focus will always be on regenerating an entire territory, but there'll be immersive experiences bringing the outsiders to the locals. And then in the afternoons, when we start our emergent design sessions, we'll begin each day with a local person who presents some of their project and gives context to their project. And the idea for this is that the design sessions are always going to be embedded in the real landscape and the real community. So these local presenters are giving more detailed context to specific projects as a way of sort of priming the pump or preparing the group to then engage in design in the context of a real person with a real project who has come to participate. So just to give you a sense, on October 4th, the local presenter will be Natalia Ortiz, talking about how we're setting up a territorial foundation, so that the design will focus in part on the emergence of territorial governance, how to distribute and mobilize resources within the territory in service to regenerative processes, and how this institution building activity of creating a foundation is a key part of coordinating all the projects on the ground. And so the local presenter will share a story about their project that they're describing, answer questions, and then be a participant in the design session that follows. And they'll just join the participants at that point. And what we're doing is we're blending the local people and their projects with the people from the outside, with specific, I would say, prompting influences for the design process, so that the people who come to ReFi Barichara can practice designing for landscape or territorial scale regeneration in the context of these immersive experiences. And they will accumulate immersive experiences throughout the time, October 4th, 5th, and 6th. And then on October 7th, we'll have a time in the morning for closing the process, for identifying next steps and how to form alliances and how to move forward to actually have collaboration between outsiders and locals for regenerating this territory or other territories into the future. And what I want to emphasize is that this design of the participants arriving, immersing in local people and projects, having a bridge of connecting with a local person and project, and then having a design session that may not involve the locals very much at all. And with the key barrier being language, that a lot of local people can't participate because this event happens to be in English, is that we're attempting to begin creating relationships between local people and outsiders. We're attempting to begin creating win-win or mutual benefit alignments between outsiders and local people and projects, so that the outsiders who come here can, in a material way, help local projects, and in a relational way, form healthy relationships. Even if their healthy relationship is simply admiration because they don't know how to talk to that person that doesn't speak English, that we're attempting to form these touch points between humans and projects that create bidirectional benefit. Now, we'll see how it goes. All of the participants will be able to report back if we were successful or not, but this is what we're trying to do. Now, I want to put this in the context of some slides I created 2 years ago to describe how to create a bioregional investment platform, to show you that that agenda, trying to bring together locals and outsiders, is to create something hugely complex and multifaceted that will require expertise from outsiders. And this is why learning how to bring outsiders to the local community and form these healthy relationships is going to be essential for bioregional scale work in the future. And so I just want to give a couple of key concepts. One key concept is that land that is in the territory, so for example, Bioparque Moncora, which is a place that people will visit, or Agua Santa, which is a private regenerative agroforestry project, but that does community work, or Las Albercas, which is the future home of the Barichara Ecoversity. There are going to be pieces of land in the territory that we will visit and that we will discuss at the land as a bank for regenerative investments, where they will do ecological things like retaining water and building soils. There'll also be places to train people and provide livelihoods and economic models for living within regenerative systems. They will also cycle nutrients and create material flows between people and landscapes. And they'll do things like provide housing, grow food, and provide for other basic needs for survival of humans. And the idea is that the land becomes a place from which to grow the capacities of local economies and weave them with others in the landscape. This way of thinking is going to guide the entire process during ReFi Barichara. And then we're going to look at portfolios of projects. So by having the immersive experiences, each of those immersive experiences will visit more than one project. And in the afternoons, our design sessions will focus on integration across projects, which means we have to think about projects and their relationships instead of projects as individual entities. And so one way to think about the diversity of projects is that some projects will have particular biomes or types of ecosystems. So for example, you might have native forest, you might have agroforestry, you might be in an urban setting where the ecosystem is housing. And so you have these different types of biomes and ecosystems. You also have cooperative structures and regenerative goals. So each place, each project may have different cooperative structures and different regenerative goals. Also, there will be different scales and complexity. When we talk about the Barichara ecoversity, its purpose is to integrate projects across the territory. It's going to be incredibly complex. Whereas another project is the Huerta Comunitaria, which is a local food resilience project, where there are 16 local neighbors that are working together to create food resilience, but all within their neighborhood. And so the scales and complexity of projects will vary. And of course, the stage of development, which indicates some projects don't yet exist, but there's a nascent field of possibility. Some projects have existed for 20 years and have lots of rich, complex relationships and capacities already. And we're going to be thinking in this kind of diversity as we explore how outsiders and locals collaborate at the bioregional scale. And then we're going to, because of the ReFi component, the crypto or Web3 component, we're going to have a part of this that tries to design systems that can help track and measure and improve and guide the evolution of entire landscapes. So if you imagine someone eventually creating a research center, like a research center you might have at a university, where you're looking at the energy flows of the Earth system, the movement of water in the hydrological cycle, the availability of wind and solar for energy, the nutrient flows within ecosystems. And then you're looking at supply chains of the human economy. How do these agroforestry systems relate to trauma healing, relate to education of children, et cetera, et cetera. And then you combine those with nutrient cycles of the ecosystems and the value creation of regenerative projects. And you say, what are the supply chains? How does data and communication and information flow so that this can all be coordinated? Do we use blockchain? Do we use these technologies? Or do we even not even use them at all? See, this is going to be where the ReFi participants are going to have a conversation that they are more ready for than most of the local people. Some local people have already been working with these things and will very readily jump in. So there's this question of, just like with academic research, there may be domains of expertise that are largely inaccessible to those who are not trained in them, but that they create research projects that are incredibly valuable and are later translated into useful information to support on-the-ground projects. We're going to be exploring this kind of complexity in the 5 days. And so during our 5 days, we're going to explore how to regenerate large-scale systems with deep collaboration around the world. And the deep collaboration, I want to emphasize the word deep. In 5 days, we're not going to go very deep. But our goal is that after the 5 days, we have deepened. We are deeper than we were before. The collaboration among local people and local projects is deepened because they see themselves in a more clear and more nuanced way, how they are part of a larger network. They'll have more connections and relationships to people from the outside who might help them with their projects. And the people from the outside will have more ways of relating to local projects in Barichara, as well as ways of thinking about local projects they might connect to in other places in the future. So the idea is for us to cultivate these capacities. And within 5 days, we may not get very far, but we want to make progress. We want to make noticeable and measurable progress. And to do this, there's a really key idea. The key idea is that the local people somehow need to have sovereignty to make their own decisions. And so this cultivation of bioregional governance by local people means that the local people can welcome the support of a particular project. They can welcome support of a particular funder because it's on the terms of the local people and what they want and need. But later they may say, this is colonizer extraction, we don't want that. And they need to actually have the power to deflect it. And this is one of the things that a biological cell does naturally. The biological cell has a membrane that allows some things to come in and keeps other things out. And what we're going to be practicing during the design building up to ReFi Barichara and during the 5 days of ReFi Barichara, and then as we debrief and learn about our experience, we're going to ask ourselves, did welcomed support arrive? Did any kind of colonizer extraction get in? And if so, how did it happen? And what do we do about it in the future? And we're going to be actively thinking about this as a local team. And so I want to share this with you for us to have a conversation. Oops. Because what I see is really important is that normally this doesn't get talked about. Normally, if this is talked about, it's sort of from like a critical, like almost intellectual lens. Like, they should have done this. I wish they'd done that in some hypothetical way. How might we do this? How might we do that? But what we're doing here in Barichara is we are actively exploring and sharing. And just like right now, we have a conversational space. How do we do this? And what's beautiful is some of the people who are coming are Colombians. Some are Colombians who live in Colombia. Others are Colombians who've moved out of the country and live in other places. And some people who are coming are from lots of different places, from Brazil, from Germany, from someone who's coming that's working in Kenya. We have like different people from different places who are coming to participate with us, where we know that we have to figure this out for every bioregion on Earth. And so we're going to be trying to figure it out next week here in Barichara. So what I'd love to do is just open this up now to a discussion, to questions. And if you could use the hand raising tool to sequence who shares. I'd love to know what questions you have, if you have comments you'd like to share. And let's start a dialogue for a little while, because I know that what I just named is actually very multifaceted. It's got many different aspects to it. But what I think is important is that we are learning as we go, and as actively as we can sharing what we learn. And so, this recording will be made public later, so we'll be able to share this discussion with others, and they'll be able to learn with us. So I'd love to hear questions or comments that you have about anything that was presented or anything prompted in you as you were listening. Stephen, please.
Well, I'll kick off the conversation because somewhere in the middle, I drifted off because what really struck me as you were talking about the outsiders coming into the area. What is the story of the eagle and the condor? As I first learned about from the Pachamama Alliance and the prophecies of the North and the South coming together and learning from each other. And this is where I really see it happening. So, yeah, it's just like, this is amazing. And of course, like probably lots of people, it's like, this can't happen fast enough, right? And that to me is the thing to be vigilant for. And you're talking about the feedback, where did colonialism seep in? It'll be everywhere. I could promise you, just because of the ignorance of those of us who grew up in that world. The best way we'll know is getting feedback from the people who have been impacted by it directly. I'm just thinking of the guy on Twitter who was immediately first and foremost suspicious of this whole thing being a big colonial project. And I'm going to go back and point him to this video once you post it, because I, like many, are really sensitive about that now, perhaps overly sensitive and ignorantly sensitive at the same time, right? Now I'm going to champion causes that in some ways I have no right to champion, because I have no clue what it means to be on the receiving side.
No, thank you for that, Stephen. And the story of the eagle and the condor as a metaphor, like to be in a time where the indigenous and the modern come together in service to life. Because there are a lot of good things in modernity. I'm a scientist. And for a history of science having lots of problems, science also has accumulated the deconstruction of hubris and the deconstruction of racism and the deconstruction of sexism and many things that science has actually helped with in a directional fashion. And so there's something really important, and similarly in social science and others, so like in anthropology and in other fields that may not be called science, but that are accumulating legitimate and important empirical understandings, how the world actually is. And it's so important for us to bring these things together because we're in such a critical moment. Claire, please.
Yeah, I wanted to say I so appreciate your asking the question, how do we create the conditions so that the local people can welcome the support? And I suppose my mind right away goes to thinking about what are the ways that what is really important to the community are lifted up, and like how those symbols, how prominent are they? How much are they a living part of the conversation of what's going on? How much has that been stirred up? Because, yeah, I just, I watched sort of big predator, big box stores coming into communities. And because the community didn't know who they were, and they hadn't been having those conversations, it was very easy to go with, to feel a lot of suspicion about the outsiders, and also to sort of buy all of the sort of, we're going to give jobs and all of that sort of thing. And anyway, I just feel that, yeah, that work and in First Nations here have totem poles that the more that I understand how they're used, where people see their own stories tied into those as symbols, living symbols that are actually meant to degrade and break down, and continually be, new symbols to come. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there, was to say just how much I know the community theater, and I think that is so amazing, but I'm just wondering how much that's happening and how much it's been in the last sort of few decades, that work.
Yeah, I'll add two comments. One is I grew up in Southwest Missouri, an hour away from Bentonville, Arkansas. For those of you who don't know, Bentonville, Arkansas is a city of like 1,000 people with an international airport, because it's the world headquarters of Walmart, because that's where Walmart started. So that model of big box stores that destroy local businesses started in my backyard. I was a kid in the 80s watching all of the local businesses close in Missouri, because the very first place a Walmart destroyed was its own local area. It spread from Northwest Arkansas to the planet, to as many places it could get to, and that model of extraction. So commenting from having lived through the destruction of small businesses in that way, it was a big part of my childhood. And what I see here in Barichara is we have a very particular, beautiful thing that's going to happen next week, which is that the people are going to get to meet Oscar. Unfortunately, Emilce is going to be traveling, but they're going to get to meet Oscar. And Emilce and Oscar are the couple that led the student, the 15-year-olds that created the documentary Paz Anónima, where they tell the story of the local people constructing their own peace. The participants are going to come and sit, and they're going to visit the community theater, and they're going to get to hear Oscar tell stories about what they do with the kids. And then they'll have the opportunity in one of the evenings to watch this incredible documentary made by local kids, where they interviewed their grandparents. And for those of you who don't know, you will know soon that Santander, where we are, is a place of immense violence at particular times in its history. Barichara is the birthplace of the independence movement against the Spanish crown for Colombia. and it has a president called Aki Leopada, who's from here. And the independence movement meant that the liberals and conservatives, which means those who wanted to liberate from the Spanish crown and those who wanted to stay with the aristocracy, those fights materialized into Barichara and Villanueva. The new village, Villanueva, was where the people who wanted to stay with the aristocracy, they went 10 kilometers away. And then for 30 or 40 years, these two groups killed each other, like family to family, brother to brother, for 3 generations. And it was the local people who constructed their own peace process. And so while Colombia gets a lot of talk for being violent, it doesn't get nearly as much talk as it deserves for being one of the best innovation places on earth for constructing peace. The construction of peace in Colombia has been incredible, especially in a place like Barichara. People say, why is Barichara so peaceful? The kids ask that question, like, if all the water went away because the neighbors were fighting, why is it peaceful here? And Emil St. Oscar said, take your camera, point it at your grandparents and ask them questions. And that's how that video was made. And so you're going to get to see living people who are still here in the community telling the story about how they constructed peace. And so all of this regenerative work, peace and water and connection to land and neighbors, all of this is fundamental, absolutely fundamental. And we're going to really see that, that once you build those relationships between neighbors, there is a story of the box store. There's a story of Canavida, which is a multinational company from Scandinavia that came to set up a recreational marijuana business and steal the water of all of the campesino farmers in Santa Elena. And they organized to stop it. And people next week are going to go visit Agua Santa, which is the regenerative agroforestry project that gathered the 14 fincas against that project and stopped it, and then actually raised the money and bought the land to protect their own water supply. And so these kinds of stories are going to be prevalent to the people who come here. And they're going to get to see that the local organizing stopped a box store, in this case, a multinational company, which Colombia's got a bit of a problem right now with multinational companies coming and killing indigenous and environmental leaders in other parts of the country, where they have not been able to stop these multinational companies. But we have a story, it's a small story, but a very important success story of that here. So we're going to see exactly these themes are going to be part of the regeneration of the territory, that are the history I landed into. I arrived after the local people had done all of this. So we're going to really be exploring this kind of richness of sovereignty and governance in the event next week. Paula, on to you.
Yes. Well, I sort of wanted to say like 3 things. One, I mean, thinking about what Steve said. So I'm just speaking from the perspective of somebody who was born in a dictatorship and was a recipient of aid. We had even, Peace Corps volunteers coming into a classroom, into our classroom. So I was like on that, I don't know, not necessarily colonized, but not the very privileged side of world society. And then also realizing afterwards, like also my share in the colonizing world. I think it's useful also not to operate with black and white categories. So, colonizing colonizers and the good and the bad. It's also mixed and so hybrid, and I think it's also very healing to recognize our hybrid nature, like everybody's hybrid nature and everybody's like. The second thing I want to say is that what I really loved about this presentation, because I've been sort of at one point I was disappointed with the world and I was looking for what is the solution, what is the approach that fixes it all, and I was just disappointed that I didn't find any approach that fixes it all, and then this is sort of integrating many things. So I was thinking, what if no single approach fixes it all, but what if cooperating, collaborating, integrating offers some hope? And I think this is what Barichara ReFi Barichara represents. And the third thing is I just want to split myself in three to go to all of the events. But of course, I will not be able to do that.
Well, the upside is you'll get to be in one of the groups and then do all three of them on different days. So you don't have to take a chainsaw and cut yourself into pieces. But I really, really appreciate what you said about not being black and white. And basically, it's like work on our own internal complex mess instead of judging someone else. Like, I'm a complex mess, I accept that, but I don't need to judge anyone else about it. And I think we'll get a lot farther by just going into our own gray instead of projecting black and white onto the world. So I think that's a really important thing. Antonio, I'll touch on your question about emergent facilitation after I get through the other questions, but I think that's really important, and I will say more about that. Stan, please.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. I think it really is a great storytelling example. And then, of course, a very place-based reference that really grounds it for us. So thank you for those things. I was really kind of going where Paula was going around. It's not black and white. I really like thinking of it. You mentioned local and not local. But I really like thinking of it at different scales too. So if you're just taking it at the germ scale, colonizing you mentioned the cell model. I think with the COVID experience, global and local has extreme meanings, right? I mean, this is a COVID event in some way. And our policy for managing COVID isn't just, local with our families. It's regenerating in different forms globally, and is, back to school in my family, with a whole different exposure than we used to target for 2 years, pods of 10, it's now pods of hundreds back to school. So that's a very interesting challenge of colonizing, in lots of different ways, not just in an economic way, but in a language way. For example, the language challenge. Language is a symbol of trust, and you're going to be inventing new words, and old words are going to have new meanings. And in hybrid, like Paula was suggesting, there isn't a pure language. All the people that invented pure languages are so disappointed when they start getting used, because they start changing and hybridizing. So I think that colonizing is a really interesting topic at different scales. And I also really like the storytelling version of that around patterns of trust, as well as sort of lands as sort of banking. I think the indicators around patterns of language and patterns of storytelling are also really being demonstrated. So I just wanted to thank you for that, and continue to think of it as scaling, because I really think that at the smallest level, you and your daughter are incubating into different communities in ways that we need to be doing at lots of scales. So thank you.
Yeah,
Very inspirational.
Thank you, Stan. Speaking of languages spreading, I'm hoping words like vivero and nacimiento del agua, some of these words that people are going to learn when they come here. I love that in Spanish they call the water that comes out of the ground a birthplace of water. They're like el nacimiento. I want lots of people saying that word by the time we're done. So yeah, I think there's something really powerful there. RJ, I see you had your hand raised and dropped it off. I don't know if you still wanted to share. I'd love to invite you.
Yes, thanks. I dropped it off because I wasn't sure if it was starting to get noisy around here, but it seems to be okay right now. I'm thinking about hierarchy, how easily that enters short visits to a place, and or assumptions of hierarchy. And I know that is so far away from the intent. And I think what you all are laying out there is a perfect approach. But I think also it would be good to have, and I know you will, have some inquiring questions to bring that out if that is influenced any of the thoughts, because the open mind and the opening of the minds is going to be really, really key. And I know you'll do that well. So just that thought, people have to take off their economist hat or banker's hat or whatever the hat is they normally wear and really listen. I think the best way is to get some real feedback. So just to add that, I heard that all the way through in the other comments. So that's all I wanted to say. It looks very exciting and very, very, very good format.
Thank you, RJ. I'd like to comment on one element of this before going to Antonio's question from the chat, which I think will actually build on what you were just saying, RJ, how to bring those feedbacks in and why we don't want people to have specific labels for what they do to constrain their thinking. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But first, I just want to mention that there's a group that's called Indigenizing ReFi Southeast Asia. It's based in Singapore. And a member of their group joined one of our Twitter spaces. That, Twitter spaces like basically a live radio show that you can come on and ask questions, and then they're recorded later. We did a Twitter space about ReFi Barichara, and this guy Ben shows up, and he's like really thoughtful and has good questions. And then afterwards he says, "We're so inspired by what you guys are doing at ReFi Barichara that we're already imitating it for our event that happens before yours. Their event is starting tomorrow." And so I had a call with them earlier this week with a group they were from Singapore, Borneo, Malaysia, and Vietnam, the specific people I spoke with on the call. And they were already incorporating design elements of ReFi Barichara into their event before we've even had our event. And just to show how much we're trying to model a different way. And that's because there's this thing called ReFi Spring, just people using the Arab Spring idea from many years ago to try to get ReFi events organized around the world. And they've been happening in the last 2 months. All over the world right now, there are ReFi events. And the founders of ReFi Spring are coming to ReFi Barichara. There's a guy named Marcelo who's from Brazil who's going to be here with us. And he's one of the founders of that group. And so they've been helping us spread conversations back and forth across other groups. And now this group in Singapore is taking what we're doing in Barichara and implementing it even before we do. Like, just to show how powerful this moment is for sharing ideas and changing our minds about things. And what I want to talk about now is the emergent facilitation. And that was what Antonio had asked me to speak more about. And there was a particular struggle, I'd say a habit that came up in our organizing team, which was this tendency to do things the way that we normally do them. And normal conferences are basically like academic conferences imitated, right? Like you go to a conference and you have your PowerPoint and you give a talk and everyone tries to be a presenter so they can justify the expenses to their organization, all this stuff that happens in the academic world, and then it's replicated into the business world. And so there was a tendency within our organizing team and with people coming to say, I'd like to propose a talk. May I be a presenter? Do you have a presenter request form? And this was a source of I would say creative tension. There's a creative tension around it. And I kept pushing back and saying, no, we're not doing any of that. Those of you who have been through my learning journeys or other experiences where I've facilitated emergence have felt what happens when you're in an emergent context. And the thing is, the categories don't exist before the moment. You don't know what you're going to talk about till you arrive there. But you arrive at what is real in the moment with the people who are there. And so it's much more meaningful, much more engaging, much more rich, and much more accessible to take immediate action on. And so that tendency to put on our hats, like, I'm someone who develops technology, I'm a tech developer, so I'm going to show up to this conference and be a tech developer. You might actually show up to this conference and be someone who grew up in a small town. And that's actually the part of you that's most important. Or you might be someone who used to be an artist but gave it up. And it turns out that's the part of you that was most important. And the thing is, we don't know ahead of time which part of us is most important until the moment. And so this thing of opening up our minds is holding a space for authentic expression. And so the way that the emergent facilitation works is that there have to be generative structures, which are minimalist, easy to understand kinds of scaffolding, which are usually things like questions or topics, but that are really open about how they're explored. And what I'm going to introduce at the beginning of ReFi Barichara in the opening is I'm going to explain what we've gathered for. So we have gathered to learn how to regenerate entire bioregions. And we're going to spend the entire week looking at the connections and the interdependencies between projects across the landscape and social patterns within the community to be able to regenerate territories, which means in the afternoons when we start the emergent sessions, we will remind the participants that that's what we're doing. And we will have prompts, but we don't have the prompts ahead of time. Like if you have a scripted set of prompts, like these are the 5 questions we're going to ask. Well, the whole conversation could veer off in a different direction and your prompts may not be very relevant. And so what I found is there's a powerful way of emergent sense making, which is feeling into where are the tensions, what are the questions, where are people stuck, where are the frustrations? Like a particular kind of frustration I've seen in different groups is that some people in the group want to move to action too quickly, and other people don't want to move to action quickly enough. And actually, both of them may be a little bit too extreme. The healthy approach to action might be something different than what anyone in the group actually wants. So if you ask people what they want, they would actually give you an inadequate response because they themselves do not know the pace that's best. And so to be a good facilitator of emergence is to notice these tensions and then design them into what comes next. And so this kind of reading of the group and working with the group is going to be really important, but it won't be coherent if we don't have a high-level purpose. And so I'm going to introduce the high-level purpose around regenerating territories. And somewhere during the event, I will start to contain or guide, like the way that a valley guides water, the movement of the event toward completion, which is that by the end of these 5 days, we want to be exploring how to prototype funding and governance for bioregional processes. I'll name that at the beginning. People will get lots of foreshadowing. It'll shape how we facilitate the discussions. So you can imagine topics that might arise. For example, we might start talking about supply chains and value flow and how to build trust. Well, those are big, multifaceted topics. How do we talk about them? It depends on who's in the room and what they care about and what they're capable of doing. Because we might end up with a really focused conversation on community currencies. I know there are a few people who are coming that are world-class experts in designing community currencies. So that could happen. Or it might be that we talk about how do you do good data gathering so that if you're looking at value flow, you know the economy's working, or you know the ecological restoration's working. Well, there are going to be people in the room who have specific expertise in exactly those questions. And so we'll be able to invite facilitators to lead, to say, oh, we're going to talk about how to measure ecological value and track it in value flows of local economy. Those of us who have been in this conversation, like, Sam, come over here. We already know who they are. And so this is what's interesting about emergent facilitation, is that there will be a way of revealing what people actually care about working on with such complexity of topics that we actually don't know how to navigate them. And so we're going to navigate them moment to moment with facilitated emergence, with the idea that we always stay within the narrative schema of regenerating entire territories, and with enough focus on governance and funding, which, by the way, ReFi is all about decentralized governance and decentralized funding. So those aren't accidental themes. Those are very strategic and intent. Those are like the core of the ReFi space is how do you decentralize governance and how do you decentralize funding? So those topics will resonate really well with the participants. So it's that sort of thing that's going to happen. And we don't know where we're going to go. And that's actually part of the fun. We'll be more alive because no one knows where we're going to go, including the facilitator. and we're going to invent it as we go and do something real. And that's why it has the potential to actually be transformative. If it's prescriptive with like a recipe, it's almost guaranteed not to be transformative. So back to you, Stephen.
So that brings to mind what is your method for capturing the information, the valuable information to go forward? Because part of the whole, the rigid, well, this is our agenda and this is the way we're doing it. Kind of the other side of that is, well, now we've got our 20-step plan and we're going to implement it, which again drops out of the emergence space into some kind of command and control structure. So how are you planning on capturing? I just see like all these great conversations and then the words vanish into the ethers, and
I've seen lots of ways of doing this. One way is to have a graphic illustrator, which is you actually have a person who turns the conversation into pictures on a giant piece of paper on the wall. I don't know how many of you have experienced that, but graphic facilitators are just incredible to watch them in action when they're doing that. Another is Post-it notes and small breakout groups. Another is sharing circles to synthesize information, which is we were all just in breakouts, pick a person from your group to share what you talked about, and we will make note of themes to feed into the next step. You can see what I'm getting at is that there actually are a lot of ways to facilitate this. And the most important thing is that we are accumulating within the group process itself. That's the most important thing, is that the participants feel like they're going somewhere they want to go. And that's what's going to keep engagement really high.
So what I'm hearing is that even the process of recording the information that's collected will be emergent.
Yeah, because we might be on day 3 and then someone realizes, oh, there are 3 people who could take their smartphone, stand over on the side and record little 3-minute videos to capture information. We didn't think about that for the first 2 days, but let's do it. And you might invent new ways of gathering information during the process itself. And so,
I mean, I'm asking in part because I know my agenda coming in is a videographer is, oh, let's, put microphones on everybody and put cameras around the room. And that just leads to a lot of files that may never be touched if it's not collected in a way that's actually useful for the people who want to take that information and go do something with it.
Yeah, and one thing that you've probably experienced in lots of other events is there are ways of doing crowdsourcing. So a good example of crowdsourcing is use the @ReFi Barichara or the ReFi Barichara hashtag and tweet. And then we can go back and use that hashtag to find all the tweets, and then we could curate them. So that's just an example of crowdsourcing the data, crowdsourcing the documentation. So what I see is really important here is 2 things. One is the local people in Barichara, we want to actively create observable benefits for their projects. So we want the people with their local projects to feel like this helped them in some way. Now, one way we're doing that, which we're going to make transparent after the event, is that people are paying $100 for this 5-day event, which includes their lunches for 3 of the days. And with that $100 per participant, we're going to be funding a lot of local projects because all of the money is going into the local community. So the site visits we do, we're paying them to give tours. We're hiring local chefs to cook for us. We're basically, we're intentionally putting money into local people and projects. And if there's any surplus money at the end, we're going to give it to the Territorial Foundation to fund regenerative projects afterwards. And so the idea is that by participating, they will get material gain by being paid for their work. That's like, minimum. We've already done that. But if they also get knowledge and insights and connection that can help them with their projects, we may have opportunities where targeted fundraising is done, where a group of people who are participating realizes that by raising $5,000 together, they can take a really key project to the next level, and they go out into the world and bring the money to them. Like, we don't know yet, but we don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to encourage the outsiders to bring capacity to local projects on the terms of the local projects. So the idea is the local projects will feel a benefit by the end. And so you see how that is a kind of documentation as well, is that we can just ask the local people, we can ask them, do you feel like your project benefited from this? Or did you feel like this was a waste of time? What did you get out of it that was useful for you? And some of them will say, well, you know, I created a list of computing and audio visual equipment for our youth media center, and someone brought me a laptop. And now the kids are able to make documentaries and do film production. And so that was a benefit, you know, and so we're going to be thinking in this way throughout the whole process, because we know that the way to avoid being extractive is to intentionally bring value. Like if the local people and projects receive value, then we at least have done that.
Right. The documentation is in the altering of reality in the process rather than a bunch of notes that sit on a computer somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll be doing things like this video right now is documentation.
Right.
So as much as possible, we build the documentation into the flow. But we're going to make it up as we go. I think with all the creative people who are coming, we're going to have really interesting documentation. Stan, on to you.
No, this is headed the right direction. That's actually where I was planning on going at. You were mentioning methods for emergent, workshop facilitation. And I was just going to suggest what Steve was doing, that there, I think you do it naturally, multimedia, but I think this is not so much, taking notes as it is building trust. And so you're really good at multimedia storytelling and people building a feeling of trust in some way. And that could be visual, and it's not logical, and I think when people go there, it might be something they smell. It might be the birds they hear. It might be some combination of Beck and response that happens because of, yeah. And so I think that's where the open mind comes in. And then the architects call it charrettes. And one of the main things they try to do isn't describe the bill of material for a building. They try to get people to look at maps and pictures. You do this naturally. What is in your mind? How do you think of the picture at scale, or the picture of a historic artifact, a butterfly, the pattern of cells on the wings of a butterfly, that different metaphor scale. I think those are different metaphors for trust. And so I think instead of thinking about it in a logical way, like you're saying academically, with footnotes, thinking of it as a trust building process, I think that's naturally what your storytelling does. And then the trust comes from multimedia metaphors. The visual bandana, means something. It's a style kind of statement or a freedom kind of statement. So I think you do it really well, but I think the architects for sure have figured out it's multimedia, and I think it's drums and sounds and smells. Especially food. I think the chefs have a big impact on placemaking.
Yeah, Jan just added into the chat about how the documentation can be in the body, which, Jan, thanks for naming that, because there's another part of this design that I just don't want to talk about too much, partly because we don't yet know exactly what form it's going to take. But in general, we have a group of medicine women who have been specifically invited into the design process to hold it from beginning to end with an opening ritual and a closing ritual. And it's meant to connect us to our bodies and to connect us to the sacred. To be in Colombia and not connect with the medicine practices of Colombia is just a huge missed opportunity. I mean, Colombia is incredible for its indigenous heritage, and it's incredible for its ethnobotany heritage. The field of ethnobotany, it was Richard Evans Schultz who basically created the field of ethnobotany as a field. Almost all of it was in Colombia. And so like the active ingredient of all of the like most antidepressants and like Prozac and Ritalin and all those things, those serotonin uptake inhibitors, all those came from plants and fungi discovered in Colombia. And so, and of course, a million more things than that. And so to introduce people to this larger world and to start to really celebrate what this part of the planet has to offer is going to be one of these subtexts. We may not name it a lot, but we will feel it a lot in our experience. Because to be in Colombia, you feel with your whole being. I mean, this is the land of salsa. This is the land of 1,000 rhythms. They counted at one point, and they counted 1,024 distinct rhythms in Colombia. And that was an old study. They might even have more now. The diversity of expressions here in the body are truly astonishing. I wanted to briefly comment on Claire's question in the chat, and then we can come to a close, which was about how do we go from the fragmented place of individual projects to really cultivating an educational framework that truly is bioregional, that truly is territorial in scale. And what I found that I learned from both Peter Berg, one of the great teachers of bioregionalism, with his project, the Planet Drum Foundation, and all the work that, like when Ecuador started creating rights of nature, Peter Berg was advising them. He's done some beautiful, beautiful work. He passed away about 10 years ago. He's one of like the grandfathers of the modern day bioregionalism movement. I learned from him and from my own studies as an Earth system scientist, because I studied the dynamic Earth as a scientist, is you start with tectonic plates. You start with the big, deep, slow, structural parts of the planet. And so we're going to begin our journey on Monday for ReFi Barichara with how the tectonic plates gave us 3 parallel mountain ranges that happen to form a triangle around Barichara. There happen to be 3 mountain ranges that are like this, and they make a triangle. And inside of them is a self-contained climate system. And we're going to talk about how to regenerate that climate system, which is going to go all the way down to the scale of here's a 3-hectare piece of land that someone's going to reforest. And so starting with geology is a really profound way to begin that synthesis process. To say these mountains are so tall, the moisture can't get over it. And all the rain happens on one side. To our west, to where we are in Barichara, you go to the Bioparque every day of the year and you'll see rain clouds in the incredible cloud forest over there, even if it hasn't rained here in 10 months. I'm like, why is that? Because those mountains are there, that's why. You cannot explain this place without the mountains. We're in the middle of the Andes. And so we're going to start with mountains. And so that way of thinking, starting with something that anchors us to an integration, it's hard to imagine something more integrative than tectonic plates. If you really learn what tectonic plates are and how much synthesis occurs on them, it's mind-boggling what they do. And we're in a place where the Caribbean oceanic plate, which caused the Lake Uritiba in Venezuela, where there's this, the ground is lower, is also what helps push the Andes upward and to the left, meaning they go from they're going to the northeast to going to the northwest, and they point toward Panama. And that giant turn is because 3 big tectonic plates collided into each other for millions of years. So that way of thinking to begin to ground us in tectonic plates is one of the big insights of bioregionalism, which is so obvious once it's named. Once you start talking about your tectonic plates, you're like, there's a mountain range. That mountain range is formed by tectonic, you don't have to call them tectonic plates. There's a mountain range, those mountains matter. That sort of thinking is going to be really big. But the other one that's really big is, in this particular place, there are 2 cultural identities. There's the cultural identity of the Guane people, who were loosely affiliated with the Muisca Federation, that are part of the Chibche language family, which have existed here in one form or another for at least 7,000 years. So there's a story of long-standing human habitation and cultural systems that were sustainable in this place. And then there's the more modern or contemporary story of Santanderianos, the people of Santander. And Colombians know Santanderianos. Colombians know what kind of people these people are. These people know what kind of people they are. These are not the same as those Caribbean people up north. They're different. And these are canyon people in the mountains. And so you can feel that there's something deeply historical and contemporary in a place-based identity that is connected to those tectonic plates, that is connected to the way of living in this region. And when everyone comes to Barichara and they're like, why is it so beautiful here? Like, because there are all these canyons and mountains. Canyons and mountains are beautiful, but it's also a harsh environment to live in. And you're going to see the toughness of the Santanderianos. These are survivors. These are the people who started a 1,000-day war, and they're still here. These are the people that constructed their own peace after 3 generations of killing each other. These are strong people. And so that way of connecting to cultural identity as it relates to place, it's sort of amazing that after 500 years of colonization, these regional identities are still so strong in Colombia, because Colombia is impossible to unify because of its mountains and rivers. It's impossible to unify. It's a giant lie that it's a single nation. It's a giant lie. They've never unified Colombia, and they never will. It's like trying to unify, Eastern Europe and the places of those really intense mountains. It's just never going to happen. And so, or like trying to unify Pakistan or Afghanistan, like those mountains make it impossible to unify. And so this is a place like that. If you wanted to think of Barichara and Santander as like Afghanistan, you're not wrong. Their cultures have very important differences, but very important similarities. And they are orographic, meaning they are based on the shape of the landscape, shaped by mountains. And so this way of seeing, this way of understanding creates an automatic synthesis. Like you're already seeing in an integrative way. And then the next piece is that all these projects are already related to each other. Barichara's got like 7,000 people. It's a small town. And the campesino farmers bring their food to the local markets. And when you come into Barichara and you walk on those little markets and there are all these fresh fruits and vegetables, it's all from less than 10 kilometers away. And they all know each other because someone drives by in a truck, they throw a big sack of yucca in the truck or whatever it is they're growing. It drives for 20 minutes, gets into town, and it's the son of one of the farmers who drove the truck, and they know the guy that runs the shop, and the woman that runs the shop is the wife of so-and-so. Like it's a small town. And so it's all already connected because the landscape is a place that is hard to act. It's really hard to fragment. It's hard to fragment at this micro scale of the local community. And that's one reason why the local community is so palpably strong. You come to Barichara and you feel the strength of the culture. And even Colombianos are like, this isn't representative of Colombia. It's like a special place because there's something that's really stable in the landscape itself. And that's a great thing to learn for landscapes that are less stable, to take those lessons. So I want to stop here just because I don't want to make this more complex. I want us to stop to be able to reflect and meditate and to say that we're not going to have a Barichara updates call next Thursday because at this time I'll be leading a group through Las Albercas to talk about the Barichara Ecoversity. But I want to just continually reemphasize that the Barichara updates are not really about Barichara. I want to continually reemphasize that we have to learn to create bioregional projects all over the planet. And what we're trying to do with this way of sharing between locals and translocals, people who move between localities, is we're trying to create patterns of learning. Patterns of learning, patterns of learnability, if you want to think of it that way. How can we become able to learn? And what we're doing in Barichara is a special place for a number of reasons. And one is that it happens to be well positioned right now for this kind of work. And so we get to see it as a living laboratory. But unlike a laboratory with lab rats, these are human beings who have agency over their own lives, who are smart and industrious and capable, and have a lot to teach the world. And one thing that I think the participants of ReFi Barichara are going to learn is that if they think they've come with their expertise, hopefully they will unlearn that a little bit and realize that actually that campesino farmer has a lot to teach them. And there's something about these hidden places of knowing that actually the biggest form of cultural trauma of this place is how many campesinos are trying to destroy their own cultural heritage to join the globalized economy because they think they're poor. when they actually have a wealth beyond measure that those of us as outsiders immediately recognize. They own their own land. They know how to work it. They know how to grow food. They live in the same town as their grandmother. You know, like things that all of us would value and has been broken for us that they still have. And they're all trying to, the young ones at least, are all trying to run off to the city to get corporate jobs. And so, so there's something about holding a mirror back up to the local people to show them that the rest of the world wishes they were like them. One of the best things that might happen is that someone from North America, like a US citizen, shows up and says, I wish I was like you, and a local campesino feels pride in a way that can only come from their sort of absurd pathology for admiring people from the US, you know, idolizing US culture, which people all over the world do that, right? There's so much idolizing of US culture. I was in Tanzania once watching people idolizing US culture, and I was like, Tanzanians have so much more community than we do in the US. We need to learn to be more like them. And so there's something about that reversing of the direction that I will continue to aspire to. I don't know how well we'll succeed, but we'll do our best. So I want to thank you all for holding this space with such love. Just every single thing that has been said is supportive and positive of this way of learning. I don't want to say it's supportive of what we're doing in Barichara, because what we're doing in Barichara is so multi-directional that we can no longer really say who's doing what. And I think that's a good thing. You know, it's like trying to find the ego placement of who gets to take credit is going to become so ridiculous. If anyone tries to say Joe did it with his leadership, we're like, oh my God. It's like, let me point you to Yvonne in Italia, let me point you to, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to quickly see that that's just absurd. We're all learning together. So thank you everyone for helping make this possible and for being on this journey. We have a long, long way to go. So onward we go, and wish us luck for the group gathering. For those of you who aren't going to be able to be here in person to join us, please send some love to Barichara next week in support of the people here, because we're trying to do something that we're going to try and make it as beautiful as we can, and we can feel your love holding us from the outside. So thank you.